Music to the noise, yeah, the mess we make. Machine Pun Kelly get caught in the fray. Facts and logic with a twist of chest. Strip it down to truth, yeah, forget the rest. You will propose the lies right out of the park. Look beyond the shadows that set the dark. Sparks of laughter fire up the night, bringing clarity where they blur the fight. Cut through the chaos, yeah, the tangled lies. Machine Pun Kelly with a set of clear eyes. Truths and jokes gonna rock this show. Step into light where the real facts glow.
Hello and welcome to the Pun Show. My very special guest just joined me. Say hi to Huggy Bear. Isn't he an adorable cat? So anyway, today I want to talk to you about beef. And I'm going to start off. I'm going to share with you this little video I made because I thought it was kind of fun.
Very big bun.
Big fluffy bun.
It's a very big fluffy bun.
Where's the beef?
Argentina.
Where's the beef?
Argentina's fighting for its life, young lady. You don't know anything about it. They're fighting for their life. Nothing's benefiting Argentina. They're fighting for their life. You understand what that means?
Hey, where's the beef? I don't think there's anybody back there.
I don't think there's anybody up there, if you know what I mean. Anyway, just thought I'd waste 30 seconds of your life with that. But the price of beef is as high as it has ever been. And I was wondering, really, why is it going up? And as I looked into it, I was more and more impressed with almost all of our current situation. In the last 5 years, all of our biggest issues, from the pandemic to mass immigration to mass deportations to I shouldn't say mass immigration, but to mass deportations to tariffs, are all exacerbating this and making it worse. And even climate change, believe it or not, is having a big impact on it. So I wanted to go through and talk about why is the price of beef so high. And I think one reason that it's helpful to do this kind of exercise is that we tend to oversimplify inflation sometimes and just blame it on one thing, like, you know, Joe Biden's policies or, you know, the stimulus bill. That's why we had the inflation in 2022. No, there's a whole bunch of reasons we had the inflation in 2022. And inflation overall, it can be compounding, but sometimes different things have different inflation rates for different reasons. So I want to see if I can find a chart here. I had gotten all my charts nice and ready for this, and then I accidentally hit the back button, and now it's all messed up. So I thought I had this one ready to go. But this is what you get when you don't have a crew. All right, so this is year-over-year inflation, beef versus the regular inflation rate. And you will notice this is going back to 2000, the year 2000. And since about 2004, even maybe say 2010, the inflation rate has been consistently above, or the inflation of beef has been consistently way above the regular inflation rate. And you'll notice this massive spike in 2020 and 2021. And we'll get into why that is and why that is still affecting the beef prices. Believe it or not, the pandemic is still affecting the price of beef. It's not the only thing, but it is a major thing. And I'll explain why. but it's not something that started in the pandemic. Part of the reason we're having issues is that the number of cattle we have has actually been in decline. If you look at this chart, it's been in decline since, like the 70s. And right now, we're even at a 75-year low. We have 87 million head now versus like 100 and almost double that back in the 50s. So why is it so low? Well, there's a few reasons for that. So we're going to come over here and look at another chart. There's a few reasons for that. Here was our peak back in 75, 132 million. I'm sorry. And then I don't know why it contradicted itself. Anyway, now it's because that's anyway, since 1975, that's the peak. But there's several reasons. One is global competition. We're importing more beef from Brazil and Australia and other countries. We import about 15% of our beef now and produce about 85% of our own, and we export it too. But we'll get into it later, but like the tariffs on Brazil are 55%, I think now, or something like that. And that's going to raise the price of beef for the imported beef. And since the imported beef can raise their prices, domestic farmers also raise their prices, and not just the farmers, but the grocery stores and everything like that. Part of it is diet changes. We eat less beef as a society. We consume less beef, and depending on how old you are, you probably remember when like chicken became a thing. It was always like eat chicken. Chicken breast meat is good for you. It's the healthy food, and that's before that, chicken breasts weren't the like the premium part of the bird. But there was a lot of energy around creating a chicken market. And then there was the other white meat from pork. And then there's another thing that's been happening over 75 years now, or over 45 years now, where we've been losing our small farms. We've lost about 500,000 small farms since 1980. And we're actually on schedule to lose another 400,000 between now and 2030. So 5 years, almost as much damage as in 45 years. And that's to do with farm consolidation. And some of that farm consolidation is they buy the farm and they use the land to grow ag crops because those are cheaper and more profitable than growing beef. So we have actually less beef for several reasons, more competition from other meats. But there's a challenge to raising cattle that doesn't exist even with other animals. And that is that the timeline to grow a cow or to raise a cow is different. And I think, where is my, okay, here we go. This is the cattle timeline. You can't just say, oh, I'm just going to grow cows this year. And just change your mind on that, on what you're doing, because there's a much longer timeline. With cows, you have to, first of all, when the cow is born, within a few months, you have to decide whether or not that's going to be a heifer. And if you don't know what the difference between a heifer and a cow is, a heifer hasn't had a baby yet. A cow has had a baby. So technically, it's not a cow until it's given birth. But you got to separate which heifers are going to become food and which heifers are going to become mothers. And so you have to do that. And there's a kind of trade-off that the heifers that you separate to become mothers, you're not going to get your money back on them for a long time. And the heifers that you send off to be eaten, you're gonna get your money back for them a lot faster. But it's still not fast. So you have to have the heifer bred, and then at 15 or so after 15 months, you can actually breed the heifer. You can get the bull in there to do his business. And so once the heifer gets pregnant, she's pregnant for 285 days, similar to human people. And, it's about 9.5 months. Then after 9.5 months, they give birth. So now this has been now about 24 months. The heifer's been there for 2 years since a calf, and she's given a baby. And so now you can raise the calf to be eaten, right? But so she's got a nurse, and first they nurse it and then they wean it. When they, well, you know what weaning means. And I lived on a beef farm with a friend of mine, and boy, the sound of weaning calves is like just depressing. They know how to cry. If you've never heard a weaning calf, then you have never heard real crying. Oh, even worse than a cat that hasn't eaten yet. So anyway, then they finally go. So that takes about 6 to 10 months. Then they go to the feedlot where they're finished off. And that means that they get brought to their ideal weight. And then once they're at their ideal slaughter weight, they get slaughtered. And then they get processed and shipped off to the stores. So altogether, you're talking about a 3 to 4 year timeline. So the heifers that were lost for various reasons, which we'll get into in a moment, those heifers are they are just now being the cattle coming from them ideally would be now just now being replaced, but then something else happened. So here we're going to talk about the perfect storm, because it's not just the one thing. It's not just the pandemic. The pandemic, when the pandemic happened, if you remember, there was all this talk about the processing centers and the undocumented workers in the processing centers, and there were children in the processing centers, right? Because they could get their little hands where adult hands couldn't go. And that they had to shut down some supply chains. And so then there was like less beef, and then the price of beef just skyrocketed. And as a result, fewer cattle got processed. When fewer cattle get processed, that means that they don't necessarily just wait until they can process them, because the cow's already at its ideal weight. And once it gets to its ideal weight, and you keep feeding the cow grain instead of, like grass, or, like, and it can't move around and stuff, the worse the meat gets. And so the meat starts to degrade, and you can only serve, like use it for hamburger. You can no longer use it for things like steak, because the meat quality has just gone down too much, and it gets like darker red, and it gets rougher and chewier, and it's just not as good. But then what happened? What happened with that is that the farmers were forced to cull their herds, and so they had fewer heifers to breed, which means it's going to have to breed a whole generation of new heifers to have heifers to stock, if you follow me, right? So we had fewer heifers. Then that was followed up by this severe mega drought in the plains and in the Midwest from 2021 to 2023, which, you know, nobody talks about. But that was actually the worst drought in the Midwest in 1,000 years. And it was made about 40% worse because of climate change. There's a bunch of reasons for that. Like if it's warmer, then up north, if you've never lived up north, never owned a farm, like I'm talking like Minnesota, North Dakota, Nebraska, some of those states, the snow sits on the ground for a long time, and then it kind of melts all at once, and then that becomes the water supply for the crops and the grass and whatnot, and that's why you get some really, really fertile land up there. And what happened is there just wasn't that snow melt to rely on anymore. And the drought meant there was less grass to eat for the cows. And the cows having less grass to eat meant that the farmers had to pay them more, or had to pay more for food. Like they could still feed them. We had plenty of corn, soybeans, and all that kind of stuff, but we didn't have enough grass. So then instead of getting free grass, they had to pay for corn and whatnot. They have they call it silage, which is like when they shuck a corn and take all the kernels off, and they've got the cob left. They just throw all of that into a big thing, and then it kind of ferments there, and then they would take it out to the beef farm and they would dump it on the ground. We had this big, huge pile of silage there. And it was actually kind of funny because it ferments. So the cows would love it. You'd bring it out there and we'd sit in the back of a truck and just try and shovel it. But the cows would just keep trying to shove their faces in and just eat it straight out of the truck. But then the cows in the back couldn't get any. And so it was like, you really had to fight those cows. I called them alcoholics. So yeah, they were drunks. But anyway, you have to pay more for silage and things like that to feed the cattle because there's not enough grass. My friend Les, he would, he'd grow alfalfa out. He had a huge field and a tractor and everything, and go out and he'd grow alfalfa and they could eat that. And then they also had other land and they would just wander around and eat grass. And they were kind of like free range cows and stuff like that. It was kind of cool experience to live on a farm like that. Anyway, so they had to keep culling cows because they just could not feed them enough. And so they ended up having a 13.3% of the cows had to be culled in 2022, which is a record. So it's the worst drought in 1,200 years. I'm sorry. So that compounded the problem. Right after the pandemic, instead of being able to replenish the herd with more heifers, they had to continue to cull the herd. And so that meant there's fewer cattle, and it also means there's fewer future cattle, if you follow me. This is where it starts to get interesting. I mean, not good, but interesting. Like there is this compounding of problems. Now we've got the pandemic involved. We've got climate change involved. And now let's get, capitalism involved. There was a herd liquidation. So what happens when supply goes down, but demand doesn't go down is prices go up, right? That makes sense. That's kind of like basic capitalism. So, and the price of producing the cattle also goes up. So there's a counter incentive here for the farmers to keep the heifers. they can sell the heifers now and get money for them. Now they can get more money for them now because the price is higher. And they can also wait and lose money later. So I've got a little chart here. Is this one? I think this is one. So this is their dilemma, right? They can lose revenue by not selling it and spend another $20,000 raising it. I don't think that's per cow, but I mean, the average farm, total 100. Anyway, I don't know what relative, they can make $60,000 immediately, or they can lose $20,000. Then there's like the water scale. They have to pay more for water because cows need water too. Land maintenance is going up, which is because of tariffs. Right now we've got to worry about the tariffs that are coming on. And it's not tariffs on food so much, because most of the food that the cattle eat is domestic, but the fence posts and the iron and the tractor supplies and all of that kind of stuff is raising the cost of food, or cost of maintaining the cows, just maintaining the farm. That goes up. Then you get the mass deportations. All of a sudden, like 25 to 40% of your workforce is gone. So then what you also have veterinary care, right? You know what you don't have to do with a slaughtered heifer is you don't have to give it medical care. But heifers you do, and especially, if they're on their way to becoming cows and they're pregnant, that's going to raise the cost of that too. And then the hay and feed went up, way up. So on average, they can either lose $100,000 or they can make $20,000. That makes a pretty easy decision financially, right? And I'm cost. I don't know what this is based on. This was produced by Claude, but anyway, you get the notion. There's a disincentive for the farmers to keep heifers. And then you've got the timeline that we talked about on top of that. Where'd it go? This one. Remember that? So right now we don't have enough heifers. And so we're 3 to 4 years away before beef prices start coming down. And that's with the assumption that farmers start keeping heifers. We need farmers to keep heifers to bring prices down, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take years before it starts to happen. And it's been compounded by things like the pandemic, like climate change, like mass deportations, and like the tariffs. That's why I say it's the perfect storm of bad policy. There's so many things we could have done along the lines that would have mitigated this. I wouldn't say eliminated it, but it could have mitigated the damage done by it. Like, I don't think that there was any way that Trump could have prevented the pandemic, but I think he could have done more to mitigate the pandemic, which is why we had more deaths. We had the highest death rate of any country in the world. Or I think it was any country in the world. Last I checked anyway. So now let's go back to here. So the head liquidation, they're just getting, or herd liquidation. The other thing is that as the prices come down and the cost goes up, some farmers are starting to go, it's not worth it. We just don't have the money to handle this. And so what they started doing is just getting out of business. So the beef cow herd drops to 1951 levels. The smallest calf, smallest calf crop since 1948. Ranchers sell breeding heifers, and more profitable to sell than breed. And that is a huge problem right now. Is there is no financial incentive for farmers to sell their cows or to keep their heifers. And so now, because we've had fewer heifers for so long, we're getting to the point where we're going to have fewer calves, which means fewer heads of cattle to sell and eat. And we're not. And then what you get when you lower the supply and you don't lower the demand, you raise the price. So now we are, as a result of this perfect storm of horrible policy, we are seeing record high prices. So, what can we do about it? I think, did I? Well, sorry, while I take a moment to gather my thoughts here. It's going to take at least 2 or 3 years. But what we need to do, since the problem right now is it is against the farmer's best interest to keep heifers. How about this? This is my solution. I'm not trying to say I'm a genius or anything, but this to me seems like a pretty obvious solution. How about instead of subsidizing Argentina, we subsidize our own farmers? How about some of that $40 billion we're sending to Argentina? Instead, we send to small farmers, because right now, every time you talk about farm subsidies, you need to understand that farm subsidies go to the large farms, not the small farms. It's not specifically written in legislation that you have to be a small farm to get it. But what they do is they make certain conditions that small farmers could never live up to as conditions for it. And so they end up only benefiting the large farmers. And that's why we've had 400,000 farms go, or 500,000 farms go out of business since 1980. Because we've made it so that it is profitable for the large farms, but not profitable for the smaller farms. And the smaller farms are going out of business, and then the larger farms are buying those out. And sometimes they're converting those beef farms into soybean farms. So, like, I'm kind of tired about hearing about how the soy farmers are really suffering. I know that there are some small farms, soy farmers, and they are suffering. But for the most part, the soy industry is not the worst hit. The smaller farmers that don't work in these areas where the crops can be automated and our harvesting can be automated and sowing can be automated, it's different. And so one thing we can do is incentivize farmers to keep heifers, like, and we could put conditions on that, like only so many head of cattle that it applies to, right? Like we will subsidize up to 100 heifers, and then that way the some of that money will actually go to small farmers, and then they're not. It doesn't make more economic sense to them to sell their cattle now than to keep it. So that's one thing we can do. Another thing we can do is stop with this mass deportation nonsense. And I got to look something up here because I meant to do this. Just wondering if the meat. Okay, so yeah, we're dealing with two different kinds of visa here. There's a visa called an H-2A visa, and there's a visa called an H-2B visa. The H-2A visa goes to ag workers, and H-2B visas go to non-ag workers, and these are both, you know, like what you would call seasonal workers. And both of these, the process to get them is very difficult, especially for the ag workers, and it's also very expensive. And it costs the average farmer about $7,000 per worker more to bring them over on an H-2B visa, and that's counts about at least 25 to 50% of ranch workers. All right, and that includes dairy cattle as well as beef cattle. So we could also, rather than deport everybody, I get so tired of it. Like when you talk about, you know, our economy literally does need them to survive. And then people are like, oh, you're like, who's going to pick our cotton? You know, no. That is not an equivalence. That is a fallacious, false equivalence. First of all, the slaves did not come over here because they wanted to. Secondly, the big second difference is that migrants are paid, right? they are allowed to leave if they want. They're not going to get their foot chopped off if they run away. Like, there is a massive sociological difference between being a slave and being a migrant worker who came over here because you wanted to, and you want to do that work, right? The other thing that's fallacious about that whole thing is if you want to follow that to its logical conclusion, then you are on the side of, you know, once the blacks were freed, we need to send them back to Africa. Like, if you want to be logically consistent in your little fallacy there. So no, I do not think that immigrants are slaves, and I do not support slave labor. What I do acknowledge is that immigrants are paid less, and that when immigrants are paid less, Americans end up getting paid less also. So it's damaging to both the immigrants and the domestic workers. So the best solution is not to get rid of the immigrant workers. It is to change our laws. Our laws are stupid. Our immigration laws are stupid. They're self-defeating. Our country was built on immigrant labor. And now we don't have the labor that we need, that immigrants have always done, and immigrants want to come and do. But they deserve to be paid. Now, if you were to, the average undocumented worker makes about $3 per hour more or less than the average American worker, right? So all we have to do is make it easier for them to get legal working status, and then that can be accounted for. But we have things right now in our immigration law that make it so hard for small farmers to legally hire immigrant workers, and there are no American workers that want to do these jobs, right? They try. You don't think they try? They're just not there. You know, how many of you want to go move out into West Texas and raise cattle? You know, you might like this, you know, these shows about it, well, or Wyoming or whatever it is. Makes for good TV. Don't see anybody wanting to live there, you know, like live in a cabin on a ranch. But the larger farms can build like these cabins and these bunk cabins and stuff like that where people stay. One of the things you have to pay for if you're bringing somebody over an H-1 visa is you have to pay for their travel and you have to pay for their lodging. The undocumented workers that you're paying for, you don't have to pay for their lodging. So get rid of that. You can say, oh, well, then where are they going to live? Well, you know, they're figuring it out right now. The domestic people figure it out. They don't have to worry about, you know, paying domestic workers. So we need people that will do that work, right? So change the law. Don't just deport all the immigrants. Like, give them a pathway to citizenship. Give them a pathway to eat. Give them a pathway to work for a living instead of complaining about how they don't work while they're taking all our jobs or whatever kind of nonsensical, you know, paradox, you know, stupid fallacy these MAGAs come up with their little red hats on too tight. It's far more complicated than they came over here illegally. Why don't they wait in line like the rest of us? Like, dude, you didn't wait in line. So shut up and sit down. All you did was pop out of a vagina. You didn't accomplish anything. You know, like somehow you're a better person because you popped out of the right vagina instead of the wrong vagina. So anyway, let's provide a pathway to citizenship. And you know what? If you're worried that they're going to vote for Democrats because, you know, the Democrats, you know, I don't know whatever all of that is about. You know, like you're on the one hand, you're talking about how the Latino vote is, you know, swinging towards Trump, but at the same time, you're all worried that every Latino that is going to vote in 5 years is going to vote for Democrats. And so this is some master plan by who? I don't know, George Soros, perhaps. Like, just stop with all the silly racist arguments and stop saying they're not racist, because you know they are, and we know they are. And so let's just stop pretending they're not. You got no problem bringing over people from South Africa because they're victims of racism when they're not. But when people are fleeing drug cartels in South America, you accuse them of being part of the drug cartel. They are fleeing. Like, you can't, on the one hand, say that all these drug cartels are so dangerous and we're letting these people in here and blah, blah, blah. And then at the same time say that nobody else, like the people that are fleeing the drug cartels, aren't really in any danger. Like, it's just insane. It is insane how just stupid we have gotten as a country. And one of the stupidest things that we have been talking about over the last 10 years is this danger that all these immigrants are coming through. Even like we've had 4.5 million immigrants that came that you know, there's a lot of misguided and deliberately so rhetoric about how many immigrants came over under Biden. You know, and all the gotaways, you know, it's like gotaways is a made up number. It's not like they actually know, it's estimated. And, you know, the people that did the estimating also seem to be the ones that want to hyperbolize the problem. So excuse me if I don't trust their numbers. But even with that, they also like exclude a lot of they make it sound like every encounter is somebody that is here now. And so they count encounters as this, you know, we've got 20 million encounters. We don't have 20 million encounters, by the way, but it's way less than that. But they would have And they count encounters, and an encounter just means Border Patrol person encountered and apprehended somebody that was crossing the border illegally. Most of the times, those people that are crossing the border illegally aren't climbing the Great Wall of Trump. They're walking through, a border crossing. And so what they do is they go and they say, look, I want to claim asylum. And then there's a brief asylum hearing where they're determined whether or not there's a credible fear. And that's not like the final one, but this is just like a cursory meeting. And then they'll either send them back or they will allow them to request asylum and wait for their asylum hearing. Most of the people that entered the country illegally actually entered with permission of the government based on our laws. Like, Joe Biden did not let them in. Joe Biden followed the law. There is a human right to request asylum that's acknowledged both by our law and by the United Nations, and that we signed on to. And the reason we have asylum laws is after World War II, when all these people that the Germans were persecuting had tried to go to other countries, and they were just turned back and ended up getting murdered, including Jewish people, including gays, including transgender people, including socialists, including communists, including all the same people that MAGAs hate now. The Germans hated them too. Well, the Nazis did. I won't say the Germans because some of the people that were trying to leave were German. Which would be like accusing everybody from South America of being in a drug cartel. Which, hey, by the way, seems to be the running sophistry coming out of the Trump administration. So anyway, most of the people that came over were, like humanitarian, we're over here for humanitarian reasons and allowed to come by the government based on U.S. law, not based on who the U.S. president is. The problem is not that Joe Biden did not follow the law or didn't follow the law. Joe Biden followed the law. Donald Trump is ignoring the law. The only one in violation of immigration laws is Donald Trump and his administration. When they start denying human rights like the right to request asylum. Donald Trump is the kind of person that would have sent the Jews back to Germany. So maybe we can back off how he's the hero of Israel or whatever in this stupid peace agreement that's not a peace agreement and isn't working anyway. Anyway, I'm like digressing. Let's look at changing the immigration laws so that our small farms can stay in business. I'm talking to you, rural America. I really mean this. Are you better off under Trump? Are the tariffs helping you? Are your workers not showing up to work because they're afraid? And is that destroying your business? If it is, and there's a good chance it is, I really exhort you to consider who you're going to vote for in the 2024 or the 2026 election. Are you going to vote for more of that? Are you going to bet your farm on Donald Trump again? If you still have it? Genuinely, I'm asking you, I'm begging you, consider, if you're a rural American farmer, is Donald Trump really better for you? I know there's all this, scary trans stuff, but who's affecting your life? Do you know anybody that is trans? Is anybody that's trans going to cost you your farm, your livelihood, your pride, your inheritance, possibly, that goes back generations? Is a trans person going to be the reason you lost that, or is Donald Trump going to be the reason you lost that? I'm genuinely asking you and genuinely begging you to really consider, if you can watch this and not get offended, because I'm not trying to offend you. I think that the small farmers in this country are a huge part of it. We eat because of the farmers. I lived on a cattle farm. I know how hard you work. I've known a lot of farmers. Never met a farmer that I thought was dishonest. I've met a lot of farmers that I love to go to my farmers market. I think a lot of those people are MAGAs, but in a lot of ways, they're the kindest, nicest people I've met. There's a lot of really good and decent farmers that have been scared deliberately into thinking that there's going to be some kind of transgender revolt and force you to like get a sex change or whatever, or is going to destroy your child or your grandchild. That's not happening. What is happening to your farm, though? What is happening to your business? Is Donald Trump really helping you? Because the Democrats do want to protect your farm. Donald Trump doesn't. Donald Trump wants the corporate farms to come and take over your farm. Are you better off under Trump? I genuinely hope that you can take the time to deliberate over that question and answer it honestly to yourself, and then really evaluate who you want to be running the government going forward. So that's my solution. My solution is make it easier for immigrants to work here. Get rid of there isn't even a permanent visa for ag workers. Did you know that? When they say, they should get in line like everybody else, there's no line to get in. You can't just go and apply for I'm going to come over here on a permanent agriculture visa. Almost all the visas require one of a few things. One, you can come over here if you have a family member. And it's only a matter of time before Stephen Miller wants to take care of that, with the chain migration kind of stuff. The second thing that you don't need to that you can come over is on a humanitarian type visa, like as a refugee or an asylee, and or as a victim of sex trafficking. So you'll have to have some kind of horrible experience and threat to your life. And Donald Trump is trying to get rid of all of that too, because that's the kind of man he is. The third way you can come over here is if you're an expert in your field, and that's how Melania, expert model, whatever that means, on an Einstein visa, or you can have there's the working visas that are pretty much, if you don't have a college degree, you're not going to get that job, or you're not going to you have to get the job to come over. You can't come over here and look for a job for one of those. You have to apply for the job and get the job, and there's just no way you're going to get most of these jobs. And even if they didn't have high qualifications, to get those visas filled, they have to first advertise and show that they didn't get enough qualified applicants, which, by the way, is I think why, if you've ever looked for jobs on LinkedIn, and you'll have people that will rerun the same jobs over and over again, and there's 25,000 applicants, and then nobody ever gets the job. It's because they're just trying to go through the motions of pretending they tried to find somebody and they just couldn't find a qualified applicant, and so they need to bring over somebody from India or China or whatever. And I'm not begrudging people for wanting to come over here. I'm just saying the whole you need to find somebody first is a joke. I know so many people that keep not finding work, even though they keep filling out applications for jobs they're fully qualified for. And the jobs never get filled. If the job got filled by somebody else, then sure, but it's not DEI that's the problem here. So anyway, and they're actually required to pay the same price, the same wage that they would if they had an American worker. But one, I don't think that's true. And number two, you can still abuse somebody that is on a visa a lot easier than you can a citizen, because their life is here once they come over here. They're fulfilling the dream. So you ask them to stay 2 hours late and work for free, they're going to stay 2 hours late and work for free. They're not going to risk getting fired and having to go back to India. They know. I say India because there's a very specific person, really nice guy that I'm thinking of. He was a former boss of mine, and that happened to him. And so, he had bought a house. He was really happy here. And then he got laid off and he had to go back to India. So he was really sad about that. And that's the threat they can hold over an imported worker's head, that they can't import over a domestic worker's head. We can still live here. So anyway, it's another reason we need to change our immigration laws. But Donald Trump, once again, now you have to pay $100,000 to bring somebody over here, which again is going to hurt the larger business or the smaller businesses a lot harder than it's going to hurt the smaller businesses. Everything he does is to make it easier for corporate America and harder for the small farmer, the small business owner. And it just gets kind of sad that it all kind of goes through. Nobody pays attention. Nobody notices. Well, at least nobody on the right. Or they notice and they just don't care. But, there's no immediate solution for this whole cattle issue, or the beef price. Nothing's going to bring it down overnight. You could, Argentina sending it over, there's a lot of outrage about that, and I kind of get why the farmers are upset about it, but there's only 2% of our beef comes from Argentina already, and it's not like they have an infinite amount of beef that they can just start supplying us with. And they have some issues with hoof and mouth disease and things like that. They don't regulate their food as well as we did, or at least as well as we used to. So there's more danger of like importing some bad beef. Oh, and I just thought of something that I forgot to mention, and that is with the another big part of the processing issue with undocumented workers not showing up to work. What happens is you feed your cattle to a certain point, and to its ideal butcher weight, and then you slaughter it, you hang it up in the cooler for a couple of days, then you process it, and then it goes to the store, ideally. Well, what's happening is with none of the with migrants afraid to showing up for work, you're losing. Either the meat becomes damaged, it's called, or it becomes spoiled. And if it's damaged, it means that it's been waiting too long, and you can still chop it up and use it for ground beef, but the prime cuts are not worth what they were. And then spoiled means that they chopped it, and then in the process of waiting for it to be butchered, they chop it up and they hang it and they drain the blood out and everything like that. And then, but if it waits too long, it just gets spoiled and they just have to throw it away. And I think since 2020, they've had to, they've either lost in value through damaged beef or just had to, or through spoiled beef. Like over $10 billion has been lost due to loss and damaged beef over the last 5 years. So a lot of that has to do with reduced labor, and a lot of that has to do with deportations. Anyway, so we need to have workers that can help process the beef, that can help raise the beef, and we need to have an incentive for farmers to want to raise heifers instead of sell them and cull them. Otherwise, it's just going to keep getting smaller, and it's going to keep getting more expensive to raise them. Now, some people I know, I can hear, and I totally understand what you're saying. Is there's the whole thing with climate change and cow flatulence that contributes to it, and I think methane is a very serious issue, and that is a very serious issue. So maybe in some ways this is a good thing to just keep going down this, but if you're going to do that, then at least figure out how to, the farmers aren't going to lose their farms. I think there's some there's some interesting scenarios that people are looking at to resolve that issue. And then, like some of the farms that they live on is not ideal for it's ideal for grazing, but it's not ideal for farming, like in these like really kind of rolling hilly areas and stuff like that, where they're easy, they just grow wild grass. And this was like on the beef farm I lived on, he had some land that was like all nice and flat and even and great for growing the alfalfa. And then there was some areas where there were just hills and rocks and stuff like that, and that's where the cows would just roam around and eat their grass in the spring and in the summer. So there's a lot more things that are complicated about this, but we need to work through those complications. And mostly I just wanted to talk about why the beef was so high. And the price of beef is high because, one, the pandemic, there was already an ongoing issue of losing our beef supply due to larger farms gobbling up smaller farms and converting to other things. And then there's also part of the problem was the pandemic, with the forcing farmers to cull their herds and sell their heifers. And then that was exacerbated by this 1,200-year drought, so that cows could not eat the grass, made it even more expensive for the farmers to feed their cattle and disincentivize them to keep heifers. And now, on top of all that, you've got the mass deportations and the tariffs, once again raising the prices even more for the farmers so that they have more incentive. And then all of that, when the price of beef goes up as high as it is, there's a disincentive to keep your heifers, and there's an incentive to sell your heifers, because you're going to get a lot more money now than you would have if you had, a year ago or 2 years ago or 10 years ago, even relative to inflation. That's why I wanted to show, where'd that one go? Where'd that chart go? This chart. So I think it's 50% more now relative to inflation. Like, relative to inflation, the price of beef is 50% more than the average thing. So, yeah. That is, I think, it for today. I didn't get any comments today, but that's okay. Hopefully it was because I was so spellbinding that nobody even thought to say anything. But if you do listen to this, thanks for listening. And if you want to drop a comment, go ahead and do that below. And if you want to say hello, feel free to do that. I'll talk to you later.